Hey everybody, Molly Winkle from Big Block Realty here. We put together this series of classes in short, digestible form for you to enjoy and learn from as your business grows. Let's get started. All right, so our next topic that we're going to be going over are checklists that make your business work. So we've got our three primary topics, so to speak, of checklists that make your business work, right? One is working with buyers and what we need in order to work with buyers. Another is working with sellers and what we need in order to work with sellers. And then, of course, open houses. Open houses tends to be really overwhelming, which is why we have a whole separate class specifically for open houses, but we do want to go over the checklists that are involved in that. If you are working on any other type of marketing or anything along those lines, you definitely want to have your checklist for that. That's basically what we were talking about in the last class about building a strong foundation, whatever it is that you are doing. But open houses specifically is something that I focus on because of the capture rate and how successful agents have been able to build their businesses based on open houses. The two primary ways, of course, is going to be referrals and open houses. We'll talk about both of those ways throughout the classes. What do you do when a buyer actually calls you and says, hey, Molly, I'd like to work with you, right? Or you're standing in there and someone, you're standing in the grocery store and someone's like, ooh, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do it, right? So what is it that you are doing? So in preparation for it, on my checklist, it says 2 days prior to meeting, you want to ensure that you have all of the buyer's information for the contracts. You guys, this sounds like something that's so basic, but we have a tendency to forget to get things like their email address because they called us and we have their phone number. I've known people for many, many years, and the only way that we communicate is through Facebook Messenger. I don't have their phone number or their email. You have a tendency to forget, so we want to make sure that we get that information because you're going to need it in order to fill out your contracts. I put together a buyer folder. So what I have in that, and you can put anything that you'd like in yours, is just basic information. Some of my notes say the 7 tips to help you navigate the buying process, why you need a trusted real estate professional, why I work by referral, the buyer presentation, and do's and don'ts of a mortgage application, what you want and need in a home, formulating an offer, the negotiating process, property disclosures, the true cost of home ownership, moving checklist, right? It's a whole lot of information. I just have that on my checklist as things that I'm going to put on the left side of the folder. The next one is going to be, on the right side of the folder is my business cards, who pays what, a guide to closing, understanding supplemental property taxes, because that's something that is specific to California that people always ask about. Homeowner's property tax calendar, closing and title costs, and a glossary of terms. Is any of that necessary? Absolutely not. Right? So none of this is necessary, but what it is it gives me my shield, right? My folder, basically, of information that when I'm going to talk to somebody new and when I'm going to meet them, I give them something tangible to hold on to. That's the reason for it. So this is what I have as my checklist. I also have in there any kind of commonly asked questions or the utilities list of phone numbers, things like that. 1 day prior to the meeting that I have with them is I'm going to make sure, number one, that we are confirmed for that time and that they understand the location. This allows me to touch base with them one more time if I haven't been talking to them on a regular basis. And then I've also got a checklist of the forms that I use, right? The forms that I specifically want for this next meeting. Me personally, I want the disclosure regarding agency relationships, the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, the market conditions advisory, the wire fraud advisory, and then of course my buyer representation agreement where they actually hire me. Then of course I want to have my checklist for that meeting. Right? So not only do I need to make sure that I have all of that 1 day prior to the meeting, but the day of the meeting, I want to make sure that I have everything printed out, my buyer questionnaire, my checklist that I have for when we actually go into escrow, and a complete folder that I want to give to them. I even have pens, you guys, on my list to make sure that I have pens for them to actually sign. How many times have you sat down and you're like, oh wait, what do I have? Right? I'm missing it. The other thing that I have is my buyer questionnaire. So the questions that I have on here, are you working with another salesperson or broker? And if so, who? I want to know who they've already spoken with. If they answer me yes, this is what I have with me if someone calls and we have that initial phone call, hey Molly, I'd love to work with you. Awesome. Who have you already talked to? I want to find out up front to make sure that I'm not violating any ethics, because I am going to ask them to actually hire me. How did you find me? Have you been pre-approved to purchase a home? And if so, what sort of budget do you have to work with? What type of loan will you be using? Because this is important to understand how to structure their offer. What's the name of the lender that you're currently working with, or what lender did I pass your information to? I need to remember which lender I was speaking to about you. I have one that I work with primarily, but we've all got the occasional other ones that we work with. Have you seen anything that you really liked? And if so, what were the things that really stood out to you? Do you own or rent where you currently are? When are you hoping to make the move, and do you need to sell your current home? We always want to make sure that we ask if they need to sell their current home to see if we can get that additional listing. That's one of the greatest things that I've been able to find is you get one of those Zillow calls where they're interested in buying a home, and then you talk to them a little bit more and find out they actually have a house to sell. It's a totally different conversation, right? Because we've got to get that one sold. How much cash do you have available for a closing cost and down payment? We need to know that information. I have found that by having it written down on my questionnaire, I don't have to footsie around and play with you to get that information out of you. I flat out just ask it. How many bedrooms and bathrooms, garage, square footage, townhouse, condo? I don't actually ask these questions, to be perfectly honest with you, because once we start the conversation, they're going to word vomit all over you, and they're going to tell you all of these things naturally. Who else will be involved in the decision-making process? I used to ask, how do you prefer to communicate, email, phone, or text? Now, what I explain to people is the easiest way to get in touch with me is through text. Please make sure you do that. The reason why is because I am able to track the conversation a lot faster that way. If they have a whole bunch of questions, I ask them to email me. But I basically want to try and have them communicate the way I want them to communicate. What are the best communication times? I work with a lot of military people, and they go into what's called a SCIF, or a secured facility, where they are unable to take their phones. I need to understand that they are in that secured facility between the hours of this and that each day, so that way I can communicate that to the other side, and I'm not trying to get, and no one's getting frustrated along the way. When are you available to look at homes? I actually no longer ask this question either because of how I run my business. I tell them, what day would you like to go look at homes? And when they say Saturday, I go, ooh, how about Thursday? And I have them take a half day off work, and we actually go during the week. I have a whole spiel about how I operate that way, but at least this way I'm setting the expectation. My checklists allow me to set the expectation with my clients. What are your motivations for buying? Do you own any other properties? And will your spouse be with you on the loan or the deed? Or will anyone else be with you on the loan and or the deed? You want to make sure that you have that. The next checklist that I have for buyers is the one that's actually for the transaction itself. I want to make sure that I have all of the documents from our initial meeting, the RPA, the TDS, the SPQ. I know I'm throwing out a bunch of acronyms, but basically all of the disclosures, the purchase agreement, the counters that we have. I want to make sure that I have a checklist of all of those things. Now, CAR offers a checklist that gives you every single checklist that you, or every single document that you could ever have in a transaction. This resulted in one of my newer agents sending a purchase agreement along with a notice of buyer to perform, a notice of seller to perform, and a cancellation of contract, all to the listing agent with his offer. Didn't work out real well. So for that reason, right, it's one thing to use the checklist that's on there, but you also want to make sure that you know and you're paying attention to what it is that you're doing. And so that's why I encourage you to have your own checklist. What are the documents that you personally are using every single time, right? I work a lot of VA, so I'm always going to be looking for the FVAC, the FHA VA amendatory clause. I'm always going to be looking for that. It's an anomaly when I don't have that, and I've got a conventional or cash buyer. So those are the things that you want to do, is making your checklist so that when you get a buyer, I have these documents that I've been reading from, right? I have those specifically in a pile. I grab my buyer folder and I start filling out all of the information. And then that way, when I meet with my buyer for the first time, I know exactly what I'm doing and my exact next steps. Does that make sense to everybody? Awesome. Okay, so I have something very similar with the seller checklist, which is 2 days prior to the meeting, what I have on the left side of the folder, what I have on the right side of the folder. For me, it's who pays what, a guide to closing costs, closing and title costs, frequently asked questions, glossary of terms, the utilities directory because they need to cancel their utilities. Y'all, I always forget to tell them to do that. And then my business card, 7 features that may sell your home faster. You can put anything in there as far as curb appeal and that sort of thing, prepping, cleaning, all of that good stuff. And I'm going to get that folder ready to go. The day before the meeting, I'm of course going to confirm the meeting again and make sure that we're still on point. And then I'm going to actually fill out the documents and the contracts in zip forms. I show up with a fully filled out listing agreement to include the commission when I go into a listing appointment. I am going to assume the sale every single time. If they won't sign with me then, not a problem. I will leave that behind so that they can read it, review it, and ask me questions later when I send my follow-up phone call with them. So for that, I'm going to have the listing agreement, the seller's instructions to exclude the listing from the MLS or the SELM. I use that on all of my listings. The wire fraud advisory, the market conditions advisory, the arbitration agreement, agent visual inspection disclosure, the TDS SPQ, and of course our BBR affiliated business disclosure. So that's what I have in my checklist of what I'm going to take with me to the listing appointment. And then of course, I'm also going to have my checklist of where I'm getting the information from. I'm typically going to print out the NAR RPR evaluation, the Realtor Property Resource evaluation of what the property is worth. I'm going to print out the Zestimate because I need to know what everybody on the street sees. Same thing with Redfin and Realtor.com. If there are any automated estimations out there, I want to have that information. If for no other reason, then I want to make sure that the seller knows that I know what the buyer is seeing, what any potential buyer is seeing. So I want to have all of those checklists. I want to have my properties that I'm using for the competitive market analysis, as well as any additional documentation that you guys like to bring for those, for your CMA, for your presentation, and I want to have my presentation together. If you have that checklist set up, then you gather all of that. You know exactly where you're going to get the information each and every time, so that way you're able to pull the most current information, but you're not trying to figure out what you want to bring with you. Another thing that you might want to do is something like fast stats for that zip code, so that way they're able to see how many days on market, average price of the house, average size of the house, blah, 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 all those wonderful things that people, or the quick stats for that zip code. It just gives you one more document in your arsenal in order to have the conversations with them and look like you know what you're talking about. I know every single website that I'm going to be visiting and every single document that I'm going to be pulling before I walk into a listing agreement, so that I'm not thinking about it. I'm literally spending my time looking at actual comps to see what I think the property is worth. Whenever I go into a listing appointment, I'm going to have that checklist of information that I took, as well as all of those documents, and then I'm going to have my questionnaire. Are you working with another salesperson or broker? How many people are you interviewing? Right? Good question to know. If so, who? Of course, I've already looked up the bedrooms, the bathrooms, if it's a townhouse, if it's a condo. How long have you been thinking about selling? What are your motivations? What will you be purchasing in the area as well? Duh, right? Have you seen anything else in the market? And if so, what really stood out to you? Have you looked at the competition? When are you hoping to make the move? When will you be using the proceeds to purchase another home? That's my secondary way of asking you, are you buying another house? It's also a way for me to get at the information if they are thinking about doing a 1031 exchange, if this happens to be an investment property. Okay, so these are key questions that I ask. Are you okay having your property being looked at any time of day? Are there children or pets that we need to consider when showing the property? Who will be my main contact? Typically, you're going to have one or another seller that will want to be the primary contact and the one that can actually make decisions. That's the one that you want to understand. And then assuming he or she will be an active participant, what is their email and everything else, so that way I can make sure I send the documents. I have had listings where I've only spoken to one party in that transaction, one person in that transaction. It's wonderful. It's just so much easier, but it allows you to not have to do the back and forth, and it also allows you to make sure that you're talking to the person that's actually the decision-making person in that couple, right? in my family, it's going to be me. I'm the one that's going to be making the decisions and signing the paperwork, and my husband just signs where I tell him to sign, right? Not all relationships are like that, and a lot of times they want to consult with others, but I want to know that I'm talking to the person that is actually going to be making the decisions. Is anyone else on the loan or the deed with you? Of course, I'm going to pull the tax records, so I may or may not ask that question. I may just confirm the information that I've already pulled from the tax records. And then, will we need to have several items removed for the home? And will the home need to be staged? And are you okay living in a staged home? We also talk about the cleanliness of the home and things of that nature. We're going to have that discussion in the hard discussions class that you have to have with some of your sellers. But by having the questions written out, it allows you to, again, not look like you are singling them out for any particular reason. It looks like this is your standard operating procedure, and that's the most important part. Then, of course, I have my listing checklist again for the same reason that we have a buyer's checklist, is because each individual transaction is different. Do we need a trust advisory for every single transaction? No. Do I need a representative capacity signature disclosure? No, right? We may or may not need that, and so I'm going to have the list of documents that I'm looking for to make sure that I'm processing, as well as the dates that everything is due, contingency timelines. Lastly, is our open house checklist. If you've ever done an open house with me, or learned how to do an open house with me, then you know that it's actually a huge pain in the butt. So open houses, we have a tendency to show up an hour beforehand, throw all the signs out, open the doors, open the windows, flip the lights on, stand there, and then complain because Molly said open houses have the best capture rate for people, and I have not had a single person walk in. Awesome. That's not how we operate. We actually I have my agents that will put in the request to hold an open house the Monday before that weekend starts, so that way they're actually looking for and gathering it. And then I have 3 days prior, 2 days prior, the day of, and the day of checklist. So things that you do 3 days prior is you're designing your flyers and you're discussing your marketing and you're beginning that pre-marketing program that you have going on. 2 days prior, you're door knocking to invite the neighbors. And then the day of, you are setting the signs out very, very early so that you don't show up all nice and sweaty because you've been putting signs out and jumping in and out of your car right before walking over there. The same day, I send a text and thank you to any of the people that came through and gave me their information, as well as what we're doing the Monday after the open house and my follow-up, the Thursday after the open house and the follow-up, the Monday after that weekend and follow-up, and then we roll into our buy or die script. These are some of the checklists that you want to put in order to make sure that if you're going to hold an open house, you know what you're doing from start to finish. I use open houses as the easiest example for realtors as far as their marketing and putting a checklist in order. But if you are going to do anything such as online advertising or marketing and doing classes online or anything along those lines, right? If you're going to go door knocking, you want to have a schedule of when am I going, how often am I going, what am I bringing, what am I doing, what am I saying, who did I visit, what was the result? You want to have all of these checklists in order so that each time you decide to take on a new marketing strategy, you have a plan for each one. So that's where we talk about the checklist that will make your business work. If you're able to take the time to put those checklists together, then when you get a new buyer or a new seller or a new inquiry or a new whatever, you know exactly what it is that you need to grab in order to make that work, in order to make your time more efficient, and then you can move forward. And like I said, it's all about building that foundation so that as you grow, you get more efficient and you can handle more business. Sound good?